like all that stuff aside, that might burn other people out, I find that this show is what sort of keeps me sane in a world where everything else is sort of compounding, where maybe, yeah, it's been a crappy week so far at my job and the rest of my week looks like it's going to be crappy. At least Wednesday nights, I have something to look forward to, getting on, watching wrestling. Even if I wasn't going to be on air, watching wrestling would be something I think I normally do. And then being able to get on with some of my friends, because Kate and Ryan are my friends, and talking about wrestling, with a bunch of our other friends who are chatting in the chat with us. Like that is my escape, from the regular day-to-day stuff.
What's going on, guys? It's your boy, Tom Talk Fresh, and stand back with another interview. Completing the Mark Order trio. I'm joined today by a name you know. I'm joined by from the Mark Order podcast. So welcome to the show.
Hey, Tom. Thanks for having me.
So if we take this back, my friend, where do you first discover wrestling as an overall fan?
Man, I can't put my finger on an exact year, but I remember the first time I saw wrestling. Believe it or not, I went to stay over with my sister at a great aunt's house when we were kids. And I don't know what happened, but either my sister wasn't feeling great or like didn't like not being home. And my aunt just put on the TV and wrestling happened to be on. And it must have been a Saturday night on NBC because it was the WWF. And I think it was the Bushwhackers on TV.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it. Like once we saw that, I got hooked, and then it was from there on. So some point in the late 80s, early 90s, something like that, probably.
So I am always curious to know from my guests, like that era that you first discovered is quite cartoony, quite character based, whereas wrestling today is more move based and things like that. So how would you feel if you discovered wrestling today with no prior knowledge, and it was like, but you're still an adult, but you have no prior knowledge of wrestling, but you discovered 80s wrestling? How do you think you'd feel with that? And then if we flip the question, how do you think you would feel if you discovered today's wrestling as a kid?
That's a great question. I don't know. As an adult, it would depend, because I feel like, there's sort of that clear line right now with wrestling, right? Where the WWE is still very sort of character driven, not as much clearly as the 80s. But that stuff doesn't really interest me today. So as an adult, if that was my only thing that I saw, I might not really be that into it. But flipping it, like you said, as a kid, if I saw people doing a lot of these moves that were being done today, and I sort of am seeing it through the filter of my 6-year-old. I think I'd still find it pretty amazing, to see guys like, Commander and Vikingo and some of these, even the Young Bucks, guys like that who, there's some character there with who they are and what they do, but the moves that they pull off are so amazing. My 6-year-old loves it. And it's not cartoony, not super charactery, but those are the guys. It's so funny. Those are the guys he still falls in love with. He loves Orange Cassidy. He loves Luchasaurus, and if he happens to catch any WWE, he loves it too. So, me personally, I'd probably not be into the character stuff as an adult. I'd get it, but I probably wouldn't really love it. And the move stuff as a kid, though, I think I'd still be into.
That's very cool to hear. So when your great aunt puts this program on and you become hooked, in your own words, how do you start consuming wrestling from that moment? Is it when you go to see her? How do you start consuming it? Like, or do you start consuming it? Or is it something that sort of goes away for a little while?
So I want to make sure I understand the question, because there's a lot there. So you're
That was a
saying
wordy question. I do apologize.
no, 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 no. So you're saying like once I find it, how do I keep it going? Like how do I
Yeah, that.
man, I mean today is so different than back in the 80s and even part of the 90s, right? Today I think if you're a kid or even an adult and you find it and you really love it, I mean the world's at your fingertips, right? I mean even in your hands at all times. You can go to YouTube and pull up anybody's history, right? And find all of their matches and see wrestling in Japan and Mexico and South America and all over the place. Um so I mean for me it would just literally be sort of going down that YouTube rabbit hole and looking things up online. It's so much easier today. Back then and obviously in the 80s and 90s. In the 90s when the internet started coming out, yeah, you could find information but you couldn't really see too much video unless you had some crazy connection. I didn't have that. So, you know, um, so yeah, I mean today it's so much easier. I'd go down those YouTube rabbit holes,
Mm,
and just continue to sort of look at catalogs and go online and you can find anything you want to. I
mm,
mean, and that's what makes it pretty cool, right? Like if you were to fall into wrestling now, and you start going down those YouTube rabbit holes, I mean, you could be into stuff that you never knew existed, right? Like
yeah,
deathmatch
definitely.
wrestling. Deathmatch wrestling is not something you're going to see on TV for free, multiple times a week. You go on YouTube, you go on other places online, and you can find that stuff and really fall in love with it.
Mm. So, but what I am curious to know is, back in the day when you first discovered wrestling, how do you keep your fandom alive then?
I got it. Sorry. Um,
I know I understood
you
what
know,
you were saying, and that's pretty cool to hear.
I back in the day, it was to me. If you see, I never was able. I was pretty young. I was born in 1984, so didn't really get into like tape trading and stuff like that. For me, it was setting the VCR, right? Like, to record ECW that was on at like midnight here where I am locally in the New Jersey area. So, the VCR was my friend recording, Nitro when Raw was on, recording ECW magazines. Um, we had a pay-per-view tradition. I had an uncle who liked wrestling too, so he had his little black cable box
Mm,
where we'd be able to watch the pay-per-views, and we'd get together and watch all the WWF pay-per-views and have pizza and have a great time. So we would do all that kind of stuff, but at the same time he had everything on VHS. He had all the WrestleManias, Royal Rumbles. He would tape them all too. So that was my own sort of personal tape archive where I could go.
blockbuster almost.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd just go if I was ever at his house and things were sort of like mellow. I could go pull a tape and be like, Survivor Series 1989. Sure, let's give that a shot. And
Mm.
that was it for me.
Do you think you bought? Obviously, you talked about there how you keep your wrestling fandom today with the internet and stuff. Do you think there's sort of a lost art in the way we consume not just wrestling, but like media, with the fact that your uncle, as you say, had all these tapes, had all this thing, but and you maybe had to wait for them, but then now, like you say, we can. If I want to watch a match that aired at this past week, for example, Will Ospreay, Kenny Omega 2, if I want to watch that, I can find it online somewhere. Do you think there's a lost art in that?
I don't know if it's a lost art because, there are certainly ways that I think you can today do research and find stuff easier, right? Like it might not have been so easy for me to look up, hey, did Andre the Giant ever wrestle this person? I'd just have to sort of like hope to find the answer in a magazine or ask the right people, stuff like that, and then track it down and go find it. You really had to be, I guess, committed to finding your answers and then going to find the content. Today, you could still do that stuff, and it's easier for you because we have the internet and YouTube and all that stuff. But where I've found things sort of being a lost art for me personally, things like music. I
Hmm.
used to be able to tell you a whole album full of songs. Like I could name an album and pretty much read you back the whole, track listing.
Hmm.
Today, because I don't consume things on CD really much anymore. I've digitized my whole, collection, and even when I want to go listen to stuff, it's usually in a digital format because I'm not like so invested in like looking at the CD, the artwork, the track listing. I don't remember stuff like what album was this on? What track is this? I could tell you it's like track 4 off the most recent album, but I don't know the track listing. I don't know, the lyrics because I'm not looking at it. It's sort of weird. Like I don't retain as much as I used to when I had a physical medium.
Hmm. I know what you mean there completely. So you did bring up the VCR earlier. What was the biggest mistake you ever made with your VCR? And maybe you lost a match. You lost a match, or you lost a pay-per-view, and you was like, "Oh man, this one didn't record."
Yeah, I mean, there were probably countless Monday nights where I thought I was taping like Nitro and I was watching, Raw because we were in the middle of the Monday Night Wars and it just didn't happen. I personally didn't tape a lot of the pay-per-views because I didn't have the box, right? So
Hmm.
like I wasn't taping the pay-per-views, but there were certainly moments where it was like, you know, WWE was going to be on a Saturday night and I wasn't going to be home and I taped it and it didn't tape or it didn't happen at that time because they got preempted by something like, baseball game went over or basketball game went into overtime. I mean, that happens now with the DVR, but at the
Yeah.
very least, you can, extend it on your phone or something like that. But yeah, I mean, I can't think of one specific sort of like example, Tom, but there were plenty of Mondays or even like Saturday nights when ECW was going to air and I wasn't really supposed to be watching ECW. So I was sort of taping it on the down low, and certainly like my dad or my mom would have taken the tape out of the VCR and I didn't know about it, and I couldn't really complain because I wasn't supposed to be watching it anyway.
It's like if I complain, I'll be in trouble, so it's not worth it, sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, a lot of times it was me just bungling the channel and the time, so it's my own fault.
You brought up your parents taking a tape out of the VCR. Maybe had they say, for example, you wanted to go back and watch a moment that sticks in my head. Uh, the first time, I don't know if it was the first time because I'm not very good at history, but one of the time mankind won the title on Raw, for example, with Steve
Sure.
Austin's help. Did you ever have a moment like that where you wanted to go back and watch something that you'd already watched, and your parents had taped over the tape, not realizing what that tape had been used? I can't find words today. I do apologize.
Yeah, I don't think that happened too much if it was unless it was my doing. Like I had sort of like my tape like that was, they knew like okay, Anthony's recording wrestling or something, like we're not going to touch it. So most of the time that was my doing. But yeah, I mean there were, I mean again, I, I can't pinpoint a specific time, but there were certainly moments where it was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go back and watch this, and then I turn it on and I'm like, oh you fool, you taped something completely different that wasn't even wrestling straight over it. Like, I did it to myself again. But then eventually, as I got older and I did have like my own, VCR and TV, those things would happen. I've still got VHSs somewhere. I'm sure if I'm at it's just a random like Monday Night Raw somewhere on a
Mm,
tape, but I don't own a VCR anymore, so I can't even take a look at it.
that's so weird, isn't it? That was probably. height of modern technology at one point, and then now it's like people don't even own them. That is so weird, isn't it?
Yeah, it's weird for that, and it's also weird sort of to be happening with like DVD players. Like
Yeah.
my mother-in-law, who lives with my wife and I, at one point she was cleaning out all her stuff, and she's like, "Do you have anybody you can use these like 3 DVD players?" And we were like, "You don't. You have a bunch of DVDs. You don't want them?" She's like, "No, I don't really watch them. I'm not really going to use them." So like I knew people who could use them. Like
Mm.
Matt from Shining Wizards. I was like, you can definitely use this DVD player, which also has a VHS player, right? And
Oh
he
wow.
was he was like, yeah, 100% can use it. And like, it just blows my mind that like even those things. I have a wall of DVDs sort of behind me in the background, and I don't have a DVD player except for my PlayStation, so I can't
I was
watch
just
anything.
I was just gonna say that exact same thing. I have a load of DVDs behind me, and literally all my DVD player is my Xbox.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. It's just my PlayStation. That's all I got. No DVD player.
Mm. So as you do move on and sort of move out to your own place and stuff, and real life sort of kicks in after high school and stuff, how does that change your wrestling fandom?
For me, I did watch, I stuck with wrestling through my childhood, through high school. And then somewhere in college, there was a break period. I probably want to say it was like the ruthless aggression era.
Mm.
I get them all mixed up all the time, but it was probably somewhere in there between like 2002 to 2004, where I really wasn't watching it. I was more involved with other stuff when I was in college. And then somewhere in college, a bunch of my friends were sort of like talking about wrestling and watching wrestling. And we wouldn't do like Monday night watch parties or anything like that, but we would do pay-per-view parties in college.
Mm.
And I had friends with houses who would stadium stack couches. So they would have a couch set up in front, and the one behind it they'd put up on cinder blocks, so
Oh, yeah,
we
I've
could
seen
all
that.
watch the wrestling. And then we'd gamble too. I mean, it sounds so funny, because it's like now, DraftKings and all that, like you could go be part of all these pools, but we were gambling live in person on pay-per-view. So it'd be like, okay, how many chair shots in the evening? It's so funny, all the stuff they're doing on DraftKings now, we were just doing in a living room. How many chair shots, how many disqualifications, who's winning the Royal Rumble, all that stuff. We started doing the Rumble pools before those were big. So that was a lot of fun. So I even after that brief period, I went back to it and then really have stuck with it since then.
Mm.
And it's been fun too, because in that period, I had met my wife, we started dating and stuff like that. And she wasn't like huge into wrestling, but now she's my, partner on the couch Wednesday nights, even Saturday nights, and last night, she's sitting on the couch. She'll watch along with me. She'll go, we'll go to events, and she tags along, and she thinks it's awesome.
That's very cool. So with your wife thinking wrestling is awesome, do you know one match that you've shown her and you're like, this is what clicked it for her? Do you know what match that might have been?
I don't know what match that might have been.
Or moment or something.
I could tell you, I'm pretty sure I knew who she saw when she decided, okay, I'm going to go further into this. She fell in love with Finn Balor.
Oh wow.
Like she saw Finn Balor, not Prince. She saw Finn and loved Finn. And I think that kept her watching. And then as we started sort of continuing on, she sort of kept going into it, because at that time it was really just the WWE. She started realizing how cool some of the stories were, how intriguing it was, and even just the move set, and how athletic it was. And she just sort of kept falling down that rabbit hole. And, she sort of gone sort of the way I have, where we don't watch a lot of WWE anymore. I mean, I'm pretty much down to zero. She watches it every once in a while. Like if my 6-year-old wants to watch, wrestling, so she'll watch it sometimes with my 6-year-old. But like, for her, I think it was really seeing one person capturing her and then her continuing to sort of follow along. And since then, I've showed her some stuff, and some stuff she's like, yeah, this is cool. Some stuff she's like, this is a little boring, it's a little slow. So it's very funny, the stuff that would have intrigued me and still intrigues me, from like maybe the 80s or the 90s, when the style was completely different, not a
Mm,
lot of, as some say, flippy do. um that stuff would still intrigue me. That can be boring to some people who, maybe just aren't into it as much.
mm. You did bring up there that you're uh watching of WWE is practically zero. Is there a reason for that? Is it time? Is there a reason? Like, what's the reason?
Sorry, Tom, can you repeat that one more time?
Yeah, of course I can.
I had some video choppiness on my side.
Okay, so basically, you brought up there that your watching of WWE is basically at zero now. Is there a reason for that? Like, what is it essentially?
Yeah, for me, they they just got to a point where I didn't find the stories intriguing, or really for me anymore. And that's fine. I get the people who still watch it. And I understand they're the biggest name in the world, right? Like, they've been around the longest. They changed the game when they, went national. So I get it, but it got to a certain point where it just wasn't for me. The stories didn't grab me. It became, for kids, and that's totally fine. I'm
Mm,
just not going to waste my time on it. I'll go back and watch the archives. I appreciate everything, that got me to a certain point. But it's just not for me anymore. And I found myself sitting on the couch on Monday nights, just being frustrated and being like, what is going on? And it was just like, I'm going to save myself the time and energy and just not put into it. And that was it. It was nothing more than just me evolving and looking for something different and just not wanting to waste my time.
mm. You obviously you said it's about you evolving and changing, but what can, in your mind, if you had the book for WWE, etc., what could they do to get you back watching full time?
You know, um, it's just a matter of the way that I find that they handle some of their booking and the people that they decide to bring in. Like, they bring in celebrities, and I get it. Like, you need it. It helps pull people in. I don't remember which one, Logan Paul or the other Paul brother that they
Logan,
bring in.
Logan.
It's Logan. I get them mixed up all the time. Logan Paul, I get it. Bad Bunny, I get it. But you put these guys into these big time matches on these pay-per-views, and you keep people off of those shows that bust their butt 365 day in day out. To me, it's just sort of like, come on. Like, let's reward the people who are there all the time. The other thing too is, I know around, I think it was WrestleMania, when Cody was going for the belt, he didn't win it. They just keep the belt on like Roman and stuff like that. Like, even though I don't watch it, I'm obviously read about it
Mm,
and everything else I do. It's just some of these decisions that they make with their booking. I'm just like, come on. Like, let's move on. Let's give us something different. Um and personally, AEW and other places have given, me content that as an adult I'm looking for a little more edge, right? I'm not a deathmatch guy, but a little bit of blood every now and again doesn't bother me, and it's a little more realistic to me. So I'm not saying if the WWE like puts in more blood, more violence, things like that, it's going to pull me in. But I think, maybe a fan base that's looking for that will be intrigued. And I think if they just sometimes give people what they want, right? Like, I know you're not always going to give the people what they want at that moment, but I think there are certainly times, and AEW's dropped the ball on that too. I
Mm,
think there are certainly times where you have to give the people sort of what they want and what they're looking for. And that would help. That would help me. I think they have some really good talent over there. Um, but it's just the story stuff for me is not intriguing.
that's fair. So you brought up obviously AEW there and the fact that you watch that religiously for your podcast and as a fan. So how do you, first of all, before we get into the Mark Order podcast, how did
Sure.
you discover AEW, etc., etc.?
So I discovered AEW because of Ring of Honor. Because obviously a bunch of the guys, the Bucks and Hangman, and at the time Cody, they had been coming over from they were starting it out of Ring of Honor, after All In. And there was that period where I wasn't really watching a lot of WWE. My brother, was like talking about Ring of Honor, and I had heard the name, but I had never really seen any of it. And I went to one of the shows at the Hammerstein in New York, or the Manhattan Center, whatever they're calling it now. And it hooked me. It was, I don't remember exactly which show, and I'm sure if he heard this, he would kick me. But it was one of their big end of year shows, and I remember it was like the the joined and they kicked that Cole out. And that had me hooked, from a story perspective, from
Mm,
the stuff they were doing in ring, it was fantastic. And then I started going a little deeper into Ring of Honor. Um, so just having those ties to Ring of Honor, some of those guys, their work in Japan and New Japan, that sort of kept me looking. And I had heard the buzz, about them starting their own thing after all in,
mm.
um, which was that was another show that sort of hooked me to continue to follow these guys around. That's really just how I found AEW through Ring of Honor, and then the evolution into building this new promotion.
Mm, fair enough. Like that seems to be the common answer, but I find with these questions you do get the common answer if that makes any sense. So then, how does the Mark Order podcast come into your life?
So the Mark Order podcast was sort of an evolution. Matt from the Shining Wizards, my brother and co-host of the Mark Order podcast, Kate the Great. The way I made it sound like Kate the Great is my brother. It's Matt, comma, my brother, comma, and Kate, my co-host on the Mark Order podcast. We went to a free enterprise show for Ring of Honor.
Mm,
And we traveled down together in the car, and we were just sort of, cracking jokes and chatting. And I don't know, somebody, maybe it was even Matt, who was like, we should maybe do like a show, or like you guys sit in one night with the Wizards or whatever. He might not have even said that, but it was just a good time. We were just chatting and all in the car, and we had fun. And then the pandemic hit in, 2020.
yeah.
And, the Shining Wizards, has their Monday night show, and they were looking for additional content. So Matt said to me, my brother, and Kate, hey, would you guys be interested? I know you're watching AEW. Would you guys be interested in doing some bonus content for the Wizards? Wednesday nights we'll get on and we'll talk about AEW. And so we started doing that. And then it got to the point where Matt was kind of like, I think we should ran this by itself. So we had talked about sort of splitting out and doing branding. And of course, us being wrestling marks, we kayfabe the whole thing. Like, we sort of started to hate each other,
Ah,
and the Wizard wanted something different in that spot. So they were bringing in this show called the Mark Order podcast. And we did little cryptic stuff. Like, we started our social, just put up pictures of like, this is starting on this date, you know, be there. And at the same time, on our bonus wizard shows, we were basically starting to, like, I guess, hate each other, or, kayfabing the fact, like, listen, I can't do this anymore, blah, blah, blah. And then we just flipped the switch one night and we just had our own brand and went on to sort of build that show out. And when we started to flip over, my brother had other commitments and couldn't continue on with us. So it was pretty much just me, Matt, and Kate. And then eventually Ryan was passing us notes on the dark shows. And Matt was
Because he
obviously busy
watched
with.
them consistently, is what I was told.
That's correct. He was watching them consistently, where, Matt was busy on Mondays and he couldn't always watch them with everything else he had to watch for the Wizards. Kate, couldn't watch them every week. I couldn't with all my other, obligations. So Ryan would give us notes and then we'd have him on. We gave him his own segment. And then eventually we were just like, this guy's got to join us all the time, just because, like, he's watching, like, and he's really great when he's on with us for his segment. So Ryan joined on, and Matt's not out of our show. Matt just has a lot of commitments on, Wednesday nights with his shoot job. So he can't really join us. And in the summer's his busy season. So we love Matt. I love Matt. We all do. And we miss having him on. And when he does get to pop in from time and time again, it's so fun. And maybe one day he'll come back, like, for a period at a regular clip to talk through the shows with us. He's not out, but it's pretty much at this point just me, Kate, and Ryan on a consistent basis, week in and week out.
So you brought up there, first of all, this sounds like a very dumb question, and I should have researched this, but was the Mark Order podcast you're in with podcasting?
So, and that's not a dumb question, Tom. It's not, because I'm a nobody, and this is really my first my first go around in podcasting. But I had done a couple episodes with the Shining Wizards where there was a summer they needed a bunch of fill-ins. So, like, I would go and fill in and on Monday nights with them. So if you were to go back, and I can't give you exact times and dates, but if you were to go back into their archive at a certain period of time pre-pandemic, I was doing some Monday nights with them when they needed to fill in, and Kate did them as well. Kate still fills in for them as well when she can. And even my brother at the time was doing some of those shows. So I had done some podcasting, but honestly, Tom, I have in college I was a DJ on the radio. So I had college broadcast experience, and then even for a short period of time after college, I had an online radio show that I would do where I'd play music and talk between everything and stuff like that. But it wasn't anything big. So I've done broadcasting, in the past. And I'm glad that I had the opportunity to do this, because I've really missed broadcasting. I know my wife had the same thing. She was a college radio DJ. She was a broadcaster. None of us were able to break into it professionally. And so every once in a while, when I'll get Mrs. Money on with me to do a bonus show or something like that with the Mark Order podcast, I think she scratches that itch, of being on the radio.
I know what you mean completely there, because if I'm being totally honest, I've done broadcasting stuff, and this is what scratches my itch, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, listen, it's not exactly the same. I'm not sitting down playing music and spinning, songs that I want to hear or that other people want to hear, but this is definitely something I missed, being in front of a mic and, sort of being on.
You talked about being on there. So what do you have to do to get yourself in podcasting, like, frame of mind or mode? Do you have to do any sort of rituals or things like that? And then alternatively, what do you have to do to come out of podcasting mode and go back into the real world, quote unquote, when the show's over?
Yeah, so I mean, for me personally, I don't really have any rituals either way. For me, it's just making sure that I'm sort of prepped and ready, right? So on Wednesdays, it's sort of easy. I watch the show and then I'm ready to talk about it. I have some notes that I have in my brain and I'm on. And as long as I see the show, I feel like I'm ready to go. And prior to that, like hours before, I'll maybe even have some news and notes pulled up of like, here's stuff maybe for that happened in the past week that I want to bring up and talk about. And on a week like this, where this coming Wednesday we'll have to talk about Forbidden Door, as long as I see the pay-per-view, I feel like I'm good. I'm ready to go. Because I've got my other hosts who were able to sort of like bounce things around. If it were just me sitting talking to people about my personal thoughts, I'd have to probably do 3 times as much prep to make sure I felt comfortable sort of talking about everything into a microphone into the void. So I'm lucky not to have that. So my sort of prep to feel like I'm on, it's not too bad for me because I feel like as long as I watch the show, when the mic turns on, I'm sort of there. And
Yeah.
again, as long as my, gear is cooperating, which I haven't had any issues with, knock on wood, yet. And then coming out of it, sort of like coming out of the show and sort of feeling like getting back to normal life. Again, not a whole lot of routine there for me. Again, once the mics are off, the mics are off. So for me, it's sort of like the post-show ritual is, you know, we have a wrap that obviously goes out with all of our podcasts on the podcast format. So I'll send over a write up to the gang, I'll sort of clean up my area, push the mic away to get back into, sort of working desk order to have ready for my shoot job. And that's sort of like the end of it for me. I don't have as many podcast commitments as other people have. So I don't feel like I need to be on all the time. And I don't spend a lot of my time on Twitter or Instagram or stuff like that. I used to. I don't really anymore because I think I also, just have a lot more real life commitments. I have a 6-year-old, I have a wife, I have family that lives here, in my house. My mother-in-law lives with us. So there's a lot more plus a job, So
Yeah.
for me, being off is not even like a thought, I'm just on to other stuff.
I know exactly what you mean there. But how about like burnout and stuff like that? What do you do on like weeks that you're like, the shoot job's been a lot this week. I really am not in the frame of mind to watch Dynamite to do the show. How do you avoid that burnout or how do you control it if it does happen?
Yeah, believe it or not, for me, this show is the way I don't feel burnt out. Like, any other stuff that may pop up, when you talk to anybody in podcasting, when you're doing this with other people, any issues you might have with those people or something that somebody does that annoys you, blah blah blah, and I'm not saying we have that, right? But of course I think you go through times where you argue about stuff on air, and we used to do that a lot more. Like if you go back and listen, there were periods where we were yelling at each other and it was just because of our opinions on something. We don't do that a lot anymore, not because it was like we said, hey, that's not good. It was just we just don't do it. Like all that stuff aside, that might burn other people out. I find that this show is what sort of keeps me sane in a world where everything else is sort of compounding, where maybe, yeah, it's been a crappy week so far at my job and the rest of my week looks like it's going to be crappy. At least Wednesday nights, I have something to look forward to, getting on, watching wrestling. Even if I wasn't going to be on air, watching wrestling would be something I think I normally do. And then being able to get on with some of my friends, because Kate and Ryan are my friends, and talking about wrestling, with a bunch of our other friends who are chatting in the chat with us. Like that is my escape, from the regular day-to-day stuff. And then it ends and I go back to whatever's going to happen in my week. But, for me, it's It's the opposite. The show for me is not something that has caused me burnout. It's actually kept me, I think, from burning out in my regular sort of life.
That's very cool to hear. And like, it is cool to hear. Do you think, though, I am just curious, if you did start to feel burned out of the show and maybe the passion for AEW started to slip, would you have to walk away from the show because you maybe felt like you weren't giving it your all? Not to lead the question, I do apologize.
No, no, that's a good question. To be honest, I haven't really thought about it. I mean, my immediate answer would probably be I don't think well it's a tough question. I wouldn't want to walk away from it because I feel so personally attached to it, right? Like I was
Mm,
here from the start. We helped all kind of create brand, and we've been, naturally we've been seeing it sort of grow. So for me, it would be hard to leave. If it really got to the point where I just was like a chore or something I hated doing, sure, I'd have to leave. But I would hope that if I felt like I have to move on from AEW, the conversation maybe behind closed doors would be like, hey, can we evolve this somehow? Maybe we turn this into something else where we're covering something that maybe we're all enjoying more, or it turns into something else. I can't even think of anything else at this moment. But yeah, that's a tough question. I guess if I really, really hated it, I'd have to walk away, but I would never want to, because to me, this is, something I helped, get off the ground. I'm still working on getting off the ground.
mm. Sorry if that was a hard question. Just it was one that popped into my head, and I was like, I gotta ask. Do you
No,
know what I mean?
no, it's a great question. No, no, do not be sorry. That's a great question. I never actually thought about it.
What about, before we look at wrapping this up soon, what about, how do you think, because of how successful Kate has been in the wrestling media overall, how important do you think her being and having the brand name that she has with Fightful and all her other projects has helped the Mark Order podcast grow? I asked your co-host this question when I had him on a few days ago, and he was really complimentary in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think that it's certainly helped, because there have been people who have come through, who have specifically said, hey, I'm here because I heard Kate talk about it on Fightful. So that definitely helps. And there are people who've come in because they hear and see Kate online, and stuff like that, and that's awesome. And Kate has accomplished everything she has, from working really hard, and being super involved and being passionate about what she does. She's For anybody who thinks Kate is not passionate about wrestling, you are highly mistaken. She's into it 125%. So I think it's really been helpful to us. What sometimes has been hard, what sometimes I think has been hard is, like, people I know personally will be like, congratulations, and I'll be like, what are you talking about? And they're like, you're on Fightful. I'm like, we're not on Fightful. Like, our podcast is not part of Fightful, and that's fine. Like,
Mm,
Fightful has done everything that they can, to pave their way in the wrestling media, and that's awesome. And Kate is part of that. That's great. We're not part of Fightful, and that's fine. Like, if Fightful wanted us to be part of Fightful, sign me up. But
mm,
so sometimes that's the tough thing, that I don't think people realize. I think people think we're a Fightful branded show. We're not. So that's the only thing that I think sometimes it's confusing to people. But Kate has just done an awesome job of, expanding her footprint. And I know she was at Forbidden Door this weekend working with Fightful. So um really been online to see if she or I think she did a show or maybe two up there. So she's just continuing to knock doors down.
mm. I fully agree. And to top it off, she's one of the nicest people in this space, I think.
Oh, 100%. I mean, the first time I met Kate was at a bar for a live Shining Wizards broadcast, and we all just again that that was a funny thing thinking back to you asked about how we started. Matt, myself, my brother, and Kate were all on the mics at that point for that one show for the Shining Wizards at sort of a live broadcast. But yeah, that was the first time I met her, and she's the same person today as she was years ago the first time I met her. She's one of the nicest people, and the most committed people I've ever met.
That's very cool. So, as we look at wrapping this up, and because I do want to be respectful of your time, we're going to
Sure.
do a segment that I call generic questions. Those of you that have seen my interviews before, we know this is where I ask my guests the questions they might get asked on social media, such as Ant's favorite match, his favorite overall pay-per-view card, his favorite wrestler's theme, his favorite tag team, and favorite wrestler. Now he'll have a place to be like, look, guys, if you ask me this on social media, I've answered this. So please go watch this. So what's your favorite overall match of all time?
Man, my favorite overall match of all time. It's I mean, a lot of these answers are probably going to be like, oh, again, but like it's I just have to think back to like when I was a kid. It would have to be Hulk Hogan Andre the Giant from WrestleMania. Because it was just one of those times. Now, I didn't see it live, but it was one of those VHS tapes that I went and pulled, and it got me into further into wrestling. So it's a generic answer that a lot of people are probably like, "Oh,
Hey,
really?"
that's why it's called generic questions, my friend.
Good answer.
What about your favorite overall pay-per-view?
Overall pay-per-view. Now that's a tough question for me only because I'm not one of these savants like Millionaire Matt from the Shining Wizards. Like he can pull up a pay-per-view a year and a card like off his brain like nothing. I can't really do that. So this is a really tough question for me. Favorite pay-per-view though, I'm going to say this in recent memory because I've been watching mostly AEW pay-per-views. Man, I think last night's pay-per-view, and this is not just a plug to listen to our show, but last night's pay-per-view Forbidden Door 2023 was really fantastic.
I
And I
haven't
know
seen it yet, but I've heard good things.
it was really fantastic, a lot of fun. I'm not gonna lie because I had a long day. I nodded off close to the end of this pay-per-view, so I have to go back and watch it. But the match card and everything I saw from it was so much fun. It's been my favorite of recent memory that I can remember. And again, that's my answer because I can't recall anything like other people can.
That's fair. What about your favorite wrestler's entrance theme?
Favorite wrestler's entrance theme. I don't know why. I always loved Mr. Perfect's wrestling theme. There was just something about that Mr. Perfect theme in the WWF that I just love. I love that. And then it's a very close one for me. Pomp and Circumstance when Macho Man Randy Savage would come out. That those two for me were just iconic. And I know a lot of people would probably say Ric Flair too, but I'm gonna stick with my two because those are probably like I don't know which one, Mr. Perfect and Macho Man's Pomp and Circumstance.
I like it. It's your answers to the generic questions, man.
They're
What
so
about you?
generic.
That's fine. What about your favorite tag team?
Favorite tag team. Again, this is sort of a toss up for me. I because of where I came into wrestling, I'm gonna go with the Legion of Doom
Ooh.
because again, when I came into that period, they were one of the most noticeable. Like, how could you not notice guys in shoulder pads with spikes in red and black and face paint with a mohawk? Like, those were the guys. So I'm going Legion of Doom.
And then as we wrap this up, who is your favorite overall wrestler?
Favorite overall wrestler. I, you know, I loved Hulk Hogan as a kid. I mean, when you were a kid in the 80s and even part of the 90s, like how could you not love Hulk Hogan? I loved the Ultimate Warrior. I mean, I'm thinking back to before you knew about a lot of the behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, I love the Ultimate Warrior. How could, again, you not love a guy who comes screaming to the ring with face paint and, shaking the ropes? But if I'm gonna be honest, and looking back with adult eyes at everything, I honestly think I have to say my favorite wrestler is Macho Man Randy Savage.
Ooh.
The work that he did in the ring was great. I personally would have to say, maybe because of the stories about the match, him and Ricky the Dragon Steamboat at WrestleMania might be the greatest match of all time. The stories through all the interviews you heard about them tell, where they'd be passing each other in the locker room or in the hallway and just be like, move 32. And then they'd take it through to the end. Like, the amount of work that he would put into stuff, and just the fact that he was such a heel and then he could be such a baby face, without really having to do too much,
Yeah.
he's plus, I mean, just the evolution of his character, a guy who would just go out and unbranded tights, and a t-shirt, to full blown, cowboy, hat with streamers and all that crazy sunglasses and stuff. Like, just a wild character, wild ride. I'd have to say my favorite of all time is Macho.
That's very, very cool. So as we wrap this up, the question I end all my interviews on, I believe with YouTube, podcasting, and social media, content creators are going to live forever in some sort of very weird way. So what is one piece of content you want to be remembered for? And one that you're like, if the good people could forget about that, I would appreciate it.
Oh boy. Man, I don't know about, it's this is also a hard question for me, because I mean, my role on the Mark Order podcast, as I'll say, like, my role, I try to sort of just keep the train on the tracks, right?
Mm,
Like, let's get from the start to the finish and not go too far sort of off the rails. Although, to sort of be the flip side of that coin, I also see part of my role is trying to instigate a little bit, needle a little bit to get everything
yeah,
out of everybody else. So I don't know if there's been anything that I've personally done that I would say, like, I want to be remembered for this. Like, I'm not a Ryan where I've played characters on our show where I'd be like, I want to be remembered for that. But I think that one of the funniest things that's ever happened on our show that I'd like for us to maybe be remembered for is, we were on and Matt was on with us one night, and it might have even just been me and Ryan that night with Matt. And we were going through a normal show, and all of a sudden in the back you hear a yell out of, like, in Matt's camera, and you hear like two cats screeching, and then Matt's camera goes black and he's gone. And he let us know later there was a cat fight in his house. And it was just a very funny moment because Matt's eyes go wide and his camera shuts. And I think Ryan and I might have talked about it for like 2 seconds after that because we weren't sure just what happened. But in retrospect, it was hilarious. So that was one that I think we could be remembered for, or also the night that Matt decided to jump on and take his shirt off randomly on our show, and he sat there shirtless. That
oh
was
wow.
funny. I don't know why. So I guess those are the little things that I'd like. So I guess, Tom, I'm not trying to cop out on your answer.
That's
A
fine.
lot, a lot of the little things that we've done, like little points in time, I think are things that I'd like to be remembered for, as well as maybe even, and this is maybe even sort of a sappy note, some of the shows that I've done with Mrs. Money, my wife, I'd like to be remembered for, because it's been us just talking about wrestling and stuff like that. It's just been sort of time for us. And even like if Ryan's joined like other people, like I think it's cool that I had that opportunity to do some stuff with her, and we're talking about maybe even doing some other stuff, me and her. So
That,
that's
that'd
fun.
be cool, I think.
Now, the stuff that I don't want to be remembered for, again, tough question, because I don't think we've had like a show or anything sort of take place where I'd be like, I don't want this to see the light of day, or I wish this could go away. And I don't think I've personally done anything where I'm like, I regret this and don't wish this ever made the air or anything like that. Certainly there were probably moments where if if I went back and listened, some of those fights that I talked about, like those arguments that we would get into on air in the past, there'd probably be some of those moments where I'd be like, I probably should have just walked away from that, like not, really gone so hard. Um, so probably little things like that. But I would also love to, it's not about me personally. I'd like to be forgotten for any moment involving the Mark Order podcast. And for those who might know, the captain, I don't know if that came up on any of your other interviews.
No, no, no.
Okay. You'd have to go back to the archive in the Mark Order podcast to a couple episodes to hear from the captain. I believe episode 69 was one in general. And then there was another one, I don't remember, where the captain appears. I'm not going to say Ryan is the captain, but there's a lot of speculation that Ryan looks a lot like the captain. And I'd like to be forgotten for with that because I'm in frame and the captain creeps me out. So it's a joke, honestly. The captain's ridiculous. But yeah, I don't, to be honest, Tom, I don't think there's anything at this point where I'd say I'd like this to be forgotten, besides maybe some of those moments where I'd gone a little too hard in an argument.
Fair enough. So as we wrap this up, Ant, where can the good people find you, your content, etc.?
Sure. So you can find me on the Mark Order podcast every Wednesday night after Dynamite goes off the air, excuse me. We're on YouTube and all of your podcast platforms. So on any of those, you can subscribe, rate, review. That helps us out. You can also find us on all social platforms at Mark Order Pod, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. And you can follow us there. We also have a link tree, which gives you links to all of our socials. If you can't go look us up, just go to the link tree, find all the links there. You can request free stickers in our link tree. We ship free stickers worldwide. We're waiting to get more stickers in since we've gotten so many requests. So you can get some free stickers from us, and you can find our Pro Wrestling Tee store, or you can go to prowrestlingtees.com/markorderpod. And then me personally, as I said before, Tom, I don't do a whole lot of like social media on my own. Again, just because I'm so like involved in like personal stuff. Outside of the podcast. But if you would like to follow me on socials, I'm on Twitter at AntMONEY, and on like Instagram, you could find me at AntMONEY 247. So you can find me personally there.
It's well worth doing, guys. Once again, I feel like I said this lately, one of the most underrated creators, I believe, in this space, but one of the nicest as well. So if you guys like this video, make sure you like, share and subscribe to Tom Talks Trash on YouTube. Follow me on Twitter at Tom Talks Trash, and I will see you in the next interview. Goodbye now.